We are live with Matthew Varga. And Matt, we're just saying, like, we're not a Mickey Mouse operation here, okay? There's 3 cameras. We got all, like, this is the real deal.
It's legit. It's legit.
This is legit.
It's intimidating.
Oh, yeah. 3 cameras set up.
I was like, oh,
intimidating.
Wow.
We were just talking about how many YouTube subscribers you guys have. I think it was like 928,000 YouTube subscribers or something.
It's around there. We should hit 1 million, I think, by the end of this year.
That's insane.
It is, but like we were talking about earlier, I think after you've been in it for a while, you just sort of become numb to it. I don't know if you guys have had the same. It's always nice when you hit a milestone and you're like you guys had a clip hit 1.5 million views. Like it's nice little ego boost. But you're also just like, okay, well, it doesn't necessarily mean like, once we hit 1 million, all of a sudden like cash is just going to roll into our pockets, right?
The sky's open and dollars start flying out of the sky.
Exactly.
Well, sometimes we think we're on a bit of a content treadmill. I mean, you guys, I'd imagine, feel that pretty regularly because it's like, your videos are doing great, but it's like, well, they only last so long until you got to put on another one.
Yeah. It's like a never ending thing. Like once you put that content out, you're just having to think like, well, what's next? Yeah. What's next? Because people forget quickly. People will watch your video today and then like tomorrow they'll be like, I don't know what Tom and Nick said.
For those who don't know, can you explain the YouTube channel? Who's doing what? What's it about? Yeah, just share with everybody.
Sure. Yeah. So our main YouTube channel is Health Nut Nutrition. So we started out, it was probably, I feel like it's like 10 years ago now, kind of like OG, back before anyone was really doing it for money or profit or being cool. So we were just doing that. And the channel started around food because my wife, she loves food, loves cooking. So she started doing just recipes and food stuff on YouTube. And then it just sort of evolved and kept growing. And then as our audience built up, eventually we got reached out by publishers to do like a published cookbook. And we did that, which was a pretty cool experience. You don't really make money off published cookbooks. I mean, like that's something that no one really tells you unless you hit like the big, like a big hit, right? Where it's like, it just sells a bunch of stuff. But in general, it's like the money that you get in advance to make it is like what you spend to make it. And then like it takes a long time to pay that advance off. So it's not really a money maker, but it was a goal that we had. So it worked out really cool. And then, once we had our daughter, which was 2.5 years ago now, we sort of the content changed to more family oriented stuff. So my wife, who runs like the YouTube channel, she's the main face of it. She really went down like the rabbit hole of parenting and taking care of babies and all that fun stuff.
That one of you went down the rabbit hole of parenting. It sounds like you didn't. So.
Exactly. I feel like once one of you kind of takes that on, the other one's just like, okay, well, like I'll just learn from what you learned, and like I'll just be here. So now it's a lot of like parenting and still like like how to live a healthy life and all that fun stuff. And then like I have my own YouTube channel as well, which is more around like the finance and the real estate investing, and specifically now mostly around like Airbnb, because we've gone down that rabbit hole. And I just found people were really thirsty for that kind of knowledge on Airbnb and how to do that. So now I've been, getting a bit more involved in my social media and building that up.
How did you get pulled into the whole real estate world if you already were in the nutrition world and producing content around that? Why get into real estate? What was it?
For me, it was just, I think like a lot of people who first get into real estate, you realize like I was working at a bank full time. I was sort of like a teller and then into like financial planning. I kind of worked my way up through the bank. And you just sort of realize...
You were selling Visa cards.
Yeah, really. You're kind of like, it's not a...
I just remember when I was at CIBC and they're like, hey, push these Visa cards. I'm like, hey, sir, would you like the Visa card with your withdrawal today?
Yeah.
I don't think they push them as much anymore.
I think like they got a lot of backlash because there was some lawsuits years ago because they were just like pushing. And it definitely like the culture there... Because it was so sales driven, it kind of fostered people to do like unethical things, like open up accounts people didn't know about. And I wasn't that person.
Sure.
I just did good on my own merits, but other people had to go down that
They could have or would have done such things. Yes.
Potentially. I don't know. But so I kind of like, once you, like when I was growing up, I thought like, I'll get into like financial planning and get into that. And like, I'll learn how money works. And like, that's the way to become wealthy. But then you kind of realize that like, the system that we live in, isn't really designed to make people wealthy. So I just sort of realized that for some of the reasons like we just talked about, like you kind of realize like, oh, the banks aren't really there to like help people retire and become rich, which is what you think when you're growing up and you're younger and you see the commercials, but then you realize like, no, they're really just there to make money. Like that's all they care about. So once I kind of realized that and like, being forced to kind of sell things that don't really make sense to people and you're forced to push products that maybe aren't the best because you get better sales revenue for doing it, and you kind of sort of see like the evil side behind the scenes, I just kind of realized like, well, this isn't what I want to do forever. So I started looking at different ways to make money. I had some clients of mine who were just like really happy and doing really well in life. And it always just seemed to come back to like, oh, they're always real estate investors or some way with real estate that they always just seem really happy.
They always seem to have some property. That's similar to us. Anyone I saw that had some financial means had some real estate. Even if it wasn't their primary business, they had some real estate somewhere in their lives. So there was just this correlation that like, maybe we should add real estate into our lives. And you're hitting on a point that I always think about is that we talked about it recently in the office a lot, that most people don't realize like when every dollar you earn, there's a chunk of that dollar that goes to taxes. So every dollar you earn,
most people realize that.
Yeah, most people realize that. Then the second thing is what's left of that dollar when you buy something, you're paying taxes. So now to earn it, you lost purchasing power to taxes. When you go to spend it, you're paying taxes. And then with what's left, that middle chunk, let's say if the top was taxes, the bottom was consumption taxes, the middle is being devalued by inflation. So even if you try to keep your purchasing power, the government is printing dollars to fund their deficit spending and their political promises. So you can't even, the piece that you're left with that isn't taxed is secretly and maliciously taxed. So you can just never get ahead.
Yeah, you can never get ahead.
And you're just like running on this treadmill and you don't know why you can't get ahead. And I think it's why, Matt, for some of the same reasons that you got into real estate, we just looked at real estate as not like the be all and end all of all investing. It was more just, oh, here is a mechanism to use the system to outpace the devaluation of the currency. Like real estate was like a 4-to-1 short on the fiat dollar where you could borrow 20%, get 80% from the bank, buy this property. If it produced some cash to pay the debt off, you owned this bigger thing with leverage. And if the dollars in the future are cheaper than the dollars today, your debt would always look smaller and you kind of got ahead.
That was more complex than I looked at it though.
I was going to say, I wasn't that sophisticated.
No, but at 21, I wasn't thinking like that. I mean, I just started because I was, and I don't know, maybe, you're 5 years old, or some of you were kind of further down kind of the rabbit hole of kind of reading different books and things like that. But for me, I was just like, I felt like I couldn't get ahead on the salary that I was at. And I was like, well, how am I going to do this? So I needed another way to make some money. And then I looked at real estate, and I wasn't thinking about the devaluation of the dollar and that type of stuff, but I just looked at real estate. I'm like, oh, this is a way that I can make money without having to just trade my time for the dollars. And it was just kind of as simple as that. And it ran some numbers, and they made really good sense at the time. For me, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. So I just kind of went down that rabbit hole. Then after years, after some time passed, then I started realizing the stuff with the banks and the inflation, I kind of piled that on. But early on, like when I'm 20 years old, I'm just like, how the heck do I make a little bit extra cash?
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of how I thought.
Yeah,
too.
we're the basic.
No, same here. I didn't have, that wasn't my first thought on how I got into real estate. That was an evolved thought, I think.
No, but now when you say it that way, if I had that knowledge back then, it would have probably expedited things or made me even more sort of keen in hunger.
I think when you have that understanding of the system, you get out of the arguing about real estate prices, because I think so many people get caught up in, is real estate going to go up further or not? It's going to crash. It's going to do this. And you're so focused on real estate in and of itself that you don't realize it's just a piece to a bigger puzzle. And the system by itself will likely drive the dollar price of real estate higher as more dollars are printed. The real estate is more scarce than the dollars. And as dollars are printed faster, it takes more and more of those dollars to buy the real estate. So real estate, it's not an argument if real estate prices are going to go up or not. It's more, do you believe they're going to print more dollars and expand the currency base? And if they are, it's likely going to cost more of those dollars to buy your property. Your debt looks smaller as it gets inflated away. But even
now that's sophisticated for me. But, but it sounds good. I like that. That's exactly what I tell people now. I tell it that way.
YouTube subscribers. YouTube subscribers.
So how did you got into real estate, and then why Airbnb? Like, what was the evolution to get to Airbnb?
Okay. So, I first started investing in real estate probably about 8 years ago, give or take. And the shift to Airbnb was really probably the last 2 years. And really what it came down to is I just started to see that the traditional way of investing in real estate, from what I was seeing with the numbers, just wasn't working anymore. Like I was finding it hard to be like, oh, I can go buy, like when I first started investing, it's like, oh, you could buy a single family home, you could put a family in, rent it out, and then you would, make a little bit of money on it. It would pay itself off slowly, and you're like, okay, great. But now over these last few years, with the prices going up, rent's not really going up at the same pace, I just found like I couldn't make that work anymore. And even properties that I had that were, we purchased a few years ago, like as some of the other costs were going up, like property tax and insurance, and, if you had utilities in there, you just started to realize like you're just slowly losing money, bleeding money. So we started looking at different alternative things, and we just were running numbers, and we realized like, well, putting these properties into Airbnb just works still.
And these properties, these were Toronto properties or outside Toronto? What kind of Airbnb are you talking about here?
So the ones that we converted are long-term rentals into midterm. So we have right now mostly in Barrie. So we had properties in Barrie, and we were just realizing like we had tenants who were turning over, and we were like running the numbers. This was, say, last year for a specific one. And it was, when I was running the numbers, I was like, okay, if I was to rent this out to another long-term tenant, we're probably going to make $2,800, maybe $3,000 a month if we're like really getting onto the high end. But when we were doing our numbers on Airbnb, I was like, oh, we can probably generate at least $4,000 a month by doing it as Airbnb. So with this property, we did some renovations to the home. We put in like some feature walls, a couple of like cool things. We put in a media room downstairs, some game rooms, and we put a nice outdoor fire pit and a few things. And this month, on Airbnb, we're bringing in $6,500 for this month already. Next month, we already have 3,000 booked with only like 8 days booked, so a full open calendar. In August last year, so I think this year we'll do the same, we brought in 8,000.
And what kind of property in Barrie is this? This is a subdivision home?
This is a bungalow. This is just a bungalow in Barrie in a subdivision.
And what type of people are renting it, and for how long is the average stay? When you say midterm, like what is this length of stay for you?
So for this Barrie one, it's not really
okay. It's
midterm.
It's
yeah,
short-term.
like we do midterm, we do short term. But with this Barrie one, it's a lot of usually like shorter term. Like the longest we might have might be like 10 days or.
And who's renting them out on Airbnb? Like what kind of people?
Usually, it's people who are coming, strangely enough, to Barrie for like vacation. Huh. You wouldn't, I mean, like, I don't know.
Like I think Toronto family?
Sometimes like Toronto family, sometimes Ottawa, people who are just going up there to spend the weekend. But because we've done certain renovations to our place, like when I first set this place up, I thought we'd be getting like on the high end, like $300 a night, which sounded good to me because I'm like, oh, I'm still going to make more than doing it as long-term. And I don't have to deal with the landlord-tenant board crap, which we're going through now on another property. But, this year, like some of our nightly rates we've been able to pull in is like $800.
Wow.
And I mean, like for someone who's in Barrie, like I grew up in Bradford, so I'm kind of been around there. I'm like, I don't understand why anyone would pay that much money to go to Barrie, but like people are, and I'll happily take it,
Yeah, but big population base down here or in, other places as well. You go up to that area of the city, it's kind of like a hub into different parts of Ontario that, cottage country and lakes and, and boating and that type of stuff. So you can get to many places from there is what I would guess, because I don't look at it, but I didn't grow up far from there, but I don't look at it as the first place I'd go to rent a vacation property for a week. But
no, I think like if someone was telling me those numbers and they're like, it was a cottage in Muskoka or something, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. So sometimes the numbers even just confuse me where I'm like, I don't understand how I'm able to generate this much from this property. I mean, we've done, like I said, certain things to make it a nicer property in Barrie, but in my mind, it's still it's Barrie.
And how has the management been? Okay. Do you have somebody up there to do the turnovers between guests?
Yeah. So we have a cleaner who goes in and does like all the turnovers. A lot of the management when it comes to Airbnb can be pretty well automated. Like a lot of our messaging is just when someone books, we have our scheduled messages that go out at like key times. So there's very little communication on Airbnb unless someone has like an issue. Like if someone has an issue and they're like, oh, I don't know this or I don't know that. But once you start seeing like certain things pop up all the time, you can create what's called like a quick reply. So if you have someone always be like, oh, I can't get this to work, I can't that to work. And it's always just like one small thing that's just unusual that maybe people don't realize. You can just create a quick reply And then if someone asks that question, you can just use that as a
So it's
reply.
like a template, or it's automated, the reply will happen by itself?
You can get it automated if you're using certain like management, like property management systems. You can have it where like it will see the trigger word and it will send it out. Or if you're just using the Airbnb platform because you don't want to pay for like a management system, then you can just have it like saved in there. And then if someone asks that question, you just go quick reply, select that one, and it'll just send your message.
And was it easy enough to find someone to clean it and do the turnovers?
Yeah. Yeah, there's always people who are willing to do like cleaning. There's some apps that you can use. So depending on like the city you're in, there's an app called Turno. It used to be called Turnover B&B. But basically it's like a marketplace with cleaners. So we set up a property in Florida recently. And I find like when you're in like the States, there's always like a bigger market for those job sites, you know, like if you need to find someone for anything, it's like TaskRabbit or all these different sites that you can use. So it's a lot easier there to find like cleaners on it. But even here, like we have a Airbnb Arbitrage in Windsor, and I just found like a really good cleaner just through that. Like you put your property up, kind of says like how many bedrooms, how big it is, how long. Is
Windsor another short-term one for you?
Windsor is a mixture of like short-term, mid-term. So for the properties that we have, because we have them in cities where it's like you don't need to do like, they don't have like bylaws that say you can't do short term unless it's like your primary residence. Like I think Hamilton made that change recently. Some other like Toronto. So you kind of get even St. Catharines. I know some people who have been like I've been doing some coaching with who are looking to turn their long terms into midterms. It's because they can't do short term there because of the way the rules and regulations work. But for most of the places that we invest in, you don't need to worry about that. So we just do whatever is going to make sense. Like we have good pricing. During the slow season, we tend to focus more on like the midterm. So we really price our monthly prices very competitively. So like we were getting most of our bookings were like midterm, like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months over like that winter. And then during the summer, we usually focus on the short term because we're getting a lot better rates.
That's so nice and mix and match. I kind of never really thought about that, but yeah, it seems obvious once I hear you say it. And on the midterm stuff, were the rents surprising to you what you would get, and how did they compare to a regular monthly longer term rent?
Yeah, so I would say you're still doing better because you're basically giving someone like a furnished property without utilities and with utilities included, internet included. So you're going to be able to get a better rate. So for the Windsor property, it's an arbitrage. So for people who don't know what a Airbnb arbitrage is, it's where you basically we rent this house from like the owner, and they know with their permission we're turning around and putting it on Airbnb. So we got it all furnished and all set up. So we're paying $4,000 a month in rent to the owner. It's 3 units, so like 2 1-bedrooms and a 3-bedroom. And then our utilities are roughly $600 a month on that property. We set this up last October, and we've averaged since October till now each month about $6,800. So our monthly costs are $48, let's just say, and we're getting $68, and that's what we've averaged over the last 8 months. So we're making like $2,000 cash flow on that property. Now, like I said, we had the overhead of getting the property set up, which was about, I think we spent about $28,000 on furniture and then first and last, so we were kind of all in for around $34,000. But we also were able to get 2 months free rent on that property, which we were able to bring in like $11,000 in revenue in those first 2 months. And that's like straight into our pocket.
And you got 2 months free rent by signing a longer lease?
By signing a longer lease, and then also like the tenant or the owner had a couple of things that he had to fix in the property, so he was delayed in getting things. So it just sort of worked out that he was like, okay, I'll give you like the first 2 months free while I'm dealing with this. But we're still able to generate, like I said, it's almost $6,000 a month in cash.
I feel like we're interrogating you now, but I'm curious. Was it difficult for the landlord to be convinced to allow you to do this?
Some landlords are, if they've never heard of the strategy. I mean, it can take some convincing if you're just reaching out to someone to be like, hey, I want to rent your place and put on Airbnb. Like,
this is giving me flashbacks, Nick, to the sandwich lease option. Remember when we learned that strategy? Like you rent a house, you do a rent to own on the house, but then you offer it out on a rent to own to someone else, and you kind of make the difference. And that was just way too complicated. There was too many problems that could happen. The Airbnb,
there was ownership questions around, especially in the States. It got outlawed in some of the States.
Because you were trying to sell an option on a house for someone to buy it that you didn't own.
Yeah.
You had an option to buy it. It was like this double option thing.
I've heard of some of those.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. This is a bit more straightforward. You rent rent from somebody.
Well, a lot of people do it without the landlord's permission. So like, especially downtown in the condo buildings, I know a number of people that have done it without the landlord's permission. You're doing it on the up and up with the landlord, which is a much better way to do it. And then it's also more sustainable versus always having to look in over your shoulder. But I do know a few people that have done it downtown in some of the popular buildings this was a little while ago. And it was working really well for them. One guy was doing it and he liked the parking spot too, the location of the parking spot, because he always went in and used the parking spot because it was right by the, whatever it's called now, Scotiabank Arena. Oh, wow. It was right there. So he's like, yeah, I just use my parking spot that I get with the Airbnb place that he's
started in and out.
Yeah. So that's what you don't want to do. Because a lot of times when people, so if I put up Airbnb arbitrage stuff on my social media, like people, they're like, that's illegal. You can't do that. Like blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, like as long as the city allows it, and like it's allowed legally, like through the rules and regulations, and you let the owner know, then there's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing wrong with doing it because it's a win-win, right? Like the owner of that Windsor place we just talked about, like he didn't want to do Airbnb. He wanted long-term tenants in there. It's a 3-unit building, so he's just like, okay, well, instead of me renting to 3 different people who might clash, might have issues, might whatever, he's like, maybe they don't pay rent. You never know if you get a professional tenant. I'm sure you guys have dealt with a lot of tenant issues over the years, as have I. And you're like, oh, eventually you just start to get sick of that and having to deal with that. So I think for him and for a lot of people who are going into that method, it's sort of a no-brainer where it's like, okay, so I don't have to worry about a professional tenant. It's a professional company. My house is cleaned professionally multiple times in a month. If there's any damage or any wear and tear issues, like it's in my best interest to fix it, to repair it, because, with Airbnb, you live and die by your reviews. So we're almost creating like a symbiotic partnership because it's like, I need to keep your property as nice as I can. So that way when guests come in, they go into it and they're like, oh, this is great.
And is that how you sold the idea, or was the landlord already aware of that?
They had already heard of the method. And they had found me through social, so they had reached out about it and see what I was doing. Like, oh, I'm interested in that. And then we had a conversation about how it looks, and it just, for them, it made a lot more sense.
The downside is that there's a lot of, so you guys operate your properties in in a very business-like way, right? I think you've been fairly process-oriented in a lot of stuff you guys do. You've had some experience in real estate. There's a lot of people, a lot of investors too, that are going to come. They're like, this sounds like a great idea. I'm going to get in. This is how I can get in with less funds. They're not going to put the work into the property. It's not going to look that good. It's going to be cheap. It's going to be on the lower end of the price point. They might get different kind of tenants that treat the place differently, or they're not able to manage the property the same way. And now the landlord's left holding the bag the same way. Because there is a lot of that too. So I think it comes back to I think you might be discounting yourself and the quality of investor you are and that you bring to the table. And that's what makes it work win-win. You know what I mean? Just like there's a lot of landlords that just are not great landlords, and they treat tenants very poorly. And then and they give everyone else a bad name. So it kind of works. I think it works both ways. But the way you guys manage it, it's a great way to do it.
And kudos to you guys. It's not like you don't have busy lives. I mean, is Nicole pregnant right now?
She is. She is. Pregnant with our second, yeah.
With your second. So this is your second. You have health and nutrition running. You're doing this real estate stuff. Then you're trying strategies that I wouldn't call completely common, at least not yet, with Airbnb and Airbnb type arbitrage type stuff. Like you are a little wild, and I mean that as a compliment. Like you're out there making things happen.
Sometimes it's to like a negative. Sometimes it's like just because sorry, traditional wisdom from people is like, oh, like find what you're good at and just focus on it and like hammer it home. And then which does make sense. But then I find sometimes just with my personality and the way I think, sometimes like, oh, like kind of like do something for a while, get good at it. And then you're like, I like to jump in and try something different. And, I like to like mix things up. Like we recently this year I got Raptors seasons tickets.
Oh, wow.
And it was because like, I wanted to be able to go to some games. Like growing up, we grew up pretty modestly. So like going to any sports game was just like unheard of. You just watch it on TV like regular Joe people, right? So it was always something in my goal to do. And then I also thought like, well, like this can be a moneymaker as well. Like I can go to games. I'm not like a crazy sports fan where like I want to go to every game. So I'm like, oh, but I'd like to like take friends to games, give some tickets to my family. But I sold and you're allowed to sell your tickets, right? But I sold probably 80% of the games, because I don't have time to go to all of them. And like all said and done, after selling tickets, and I was selling them for like less than Ticketmaster value. Like most of them I sold to like family and friends for cost. But even then I was still able to generate just about $5,000 profit. So it's like I owned seasons tickets. I went to games. I had a good time. I gave some to family and friends. And then I was still able to generate $400 a month cash flow by just like selling tickets to people and still at fair prices. So it's just like I think like we live in a cool time now where it's like you can really make money in so many different ways if you just sort of like are willing to like test things out and try different things. So
that's the difference is if you're willing to do it and take the time to do it, because it takes time because you have to be posting the tickets and things like that, whereas you're willing to do it. And there's a lot of people, because Anthony was asking me this yesterday when we were doing that podcast, and it's just a lot of people will, and I was talking to someone this morning that was saying the same thing, they just will make excuses about stuff. They'll be like, well, it's so hard for me right now. Like, I have a young kid at home and my wife's pregnant. And they're like, it's so, like, I can't get the time. And I'm like, well, I don't know, that's fine. And maybe you can, and everyone's circumstances are different, but there's a lot of people that have young kids at home that have managed to do a whole heck of a lot of stuff if you're using that as an excuse, and you're just willing to kind of look past that and just structure your life in such a way that you're able to kind of do these extra things too, right? And I think, I don't know, that's an important thing to realize.
So why don't you suffer from that? What is it about you? Why are you wired the way you are, Matt?
I don't know. I think like a lot of people, it's like if you grew up pretty much, like I had a single mom, worked 3 jobs, like, so, we'd raised ourselves a lot as like kids. So I feel like when you kind of grow up through that, like you see like my mom's work ethic, which rubbed off on me and made me want to work harder. But I think like, like we had gotten like a house that we had owned got foreclosed on. We got like kicked out of it at one point. Geez. This is back in like the 90s when interest rates were like, double digits. I remember like our water getting shut off at one point, and we'd take baths with like kettle water, boiled kettle and dump it in. So it's like those things still kind of like stuck with me up until until now. I still think of it vividly, and it just makes you realize like, oh, that's not what I want.
So you have this fear that makes you run, you're like, I'm going to get busy.
Yeah. You're like, I have to get busy. Sometimes it's like detrimental because it gives you a bit of a limiting mindset too, where you're like, sometimes like I find like I'm too protective of money and like things that we've done.
Once you have a little bit, then you're scared to lose it.
It's amazing how that works. You don't really think about it, but then once you start to do well, it's like I do find I was a much bigger risk taker when I had nothing.
Oh,
right? When you have nothing, you're like, okay, like we'll buy this property. Sure, it doesn't work right now, but we'll figure it out. We'll make this work. But now, once you start to have things, you're like, well, if I mess up this and all this could kind of go down.
You have more to lose. You had nothing to lose. I was just talking about this at lunch with someone, that when you have nothing to lose, everything's a possibility. Like remember when we started with student rentals, we didn't have a clue what we were doing. We didn't have a clue, but nothing seemed that scary. Now, when you talk to people maybe who are in their 50s, let's say, and you talk to them about student rentals, like, oh, well, what kind of insurance would I get to make sure the students, if they have a party, I'm in the clear. Who's going to manage it? How are the property managers like? What school? What are the data? You kind of have what's going to happen with interest rates. Whereas when we were in our 20s, we didn't have any of these thoughts. It was like, oh, I think this, like, it's that much rent and that much money comes in. Oh, let's buy this.
So something else Anthony asked me, he's like, hey, so do you think when you started you were over leveraged? I was like, hell yeah, I'm
completely over leveraged.
So over leveraged
by like multiples. But he's like, well, how did that work? I'm like, I had to your point, I had nothing to lose. I'm a big deal. What are you going to take? You're going to take, I think at that point in my life,
here's my Honda Civic. There you go.
Yeah, which was leased anyway.
Right,
so I'm like, here, you can have it. Like
at that point, I didn't even have a car when I was first getting into stuff. I was like, oh,
I got some credit card debt. You can have my Honda Civic, and that's pretty much it. I have a little bit of clothes. You want my clothing? That was it.
Yeah, I think it's just like realizing like, well, what's the alternative, right? Sometimes you have to think of that too. It's like, oh, if you're not taking any action or doing anything or taking the risk, I'm just like, well, what's the alternative? The alternative is like, I don't know, like not doing anything, just sort of like living your existence without any purpose or without any, like, you need to grow, you need to take risks to like grow and do things.
You guys must be having some interesting thoughts as a family and as a household now, because I want to talk to you about Florida in a second, because I think you're doing something in Florida as well. But with the way your business is with health and nut nutrition and real estate, you're not tied really, it feels like to me, to a geographic area.
We're not.
So it's kind of must have some interesting conversations on where you guys want to live and how you want to live. No?
Yeah, we have been like, so I've found, for me, like the Canadian real estate market, just the numbers aren't working as much for me and like sort of now what my goals are.
You're a Jedi master. Now you're a Jedi master.
Not even that. It's just like, I just found like, oh, it just, the amount of money you have to put down for the amount of cash flow that I'm going to make just at this point now. Like, yeah, sure. If I was first starting, it's like, it makes sense. Like you got nothing, like you said, you got nothing to lose. But now for me, it's like, I'm not really going to get the return that I would like to see on my capital. So now I've been looking more at the US, and that's why we started doing things in Florida. And we're now working on getting our visa, our US like working visa. So, I mean, we're lucky because we have like the online presence, and we have an online store. So we do trade with the US. So we're able to qualify for, most people when they're trying to get a US visa as a Canadian, they usually go like the E2 route, right? And you guys might have heard people talk about that. And it's when you're investing in a business down there. So normally it's like you have a large capital outlay. Like typically they don't have a definitive number, but they usually say you have to invest like $100,000, give or take. This is the general
business
advice.
plan, $100,000. Yeah,
exactly. So we're lucky because we have an online store that does trade with the US. We have people in the US who buy products off our store. We're now able to qualify for like an E1 visa, which is sort of like basically like a trade visa. Okay. So because we do trade between Canada and the US, we can actually look to and then we have no capital outlay.
Oh, wow. I don't think I've heard of an E1 visa.
Yeah. So it's under the same.
Asked. I didn't ask if there was an E2 visa. I guess the logical question would be, what is the E1 visa?
Yeah. So it is like if you have that ability, it's just, it means we don't have to invest $100,000 or, 50,000 or whatever to purchase a business that maybe you don't necessarily want to run. Cause like some people want to get a US visa. They're like, well, I don't really want to buy a chain of something.
So you're in this process right now?
Yeah, we're in the process right now.
You have to go to the consulate for a meeting and
we will eventually. So right now it's just like collecting all the information, to our to a lawyer is helping us like put the package together so they can send it. And then it's just going to be, we'll have to do our interview.
That's why you're in Florida.
Well, we were in Florida because like at the time everything here was locked up, during those
There's also something called sunshine.
Yeah, there's sunshine. Yeah. So like I feel like a lot of Canadians, like most of us have like a sort of a dream of being like, once you get sick of winter, you're kind of like, okay, like I'd like to spend the winter.
I didn't know the dream was something so simple as I would like to see this comet in the sky or this star in the sky sometimes,
Yeah, there's a lot of like factors, but then also just like the numbers down there make sense.
Yeah, cool. So what are you doing? Can you give us an example of something? Because you're doing an Airbnb down there?
Yeah. So right now we just set up last month. At the beginning of June, we set up, and it's an Airbnb arbitrage as well.
Okay. So
this one, we rent. So this is in Fort Lauderdale, kind of the Fort Lauderdale area. Yeah. Similar thing. We approached an owner who had it up for long-term rent. Right now in the US, there's a lot of properties just sitting. Right. Like, so I think people had like high expectations for rent, so like you can go on Zillow or whatever you look at for properties and you can see properties that like they've been sitting there for like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. It's weird for Canadians or if you're from Ontario to see that kind of stuff. We're not used to that here. Yeah.
It's very different down there. So it's like, oh, you see these properties sitting there, prime people to reach out to be like, hey, like we want to rent your property. We're going to put it on Airbnb. We told him like the value to him. He understood. He was like, okay, let's go. We were able to get him down. I think he had it listed at like $6,000 a month in rent. We got it down to like $5,000. So like our all-in cost on that property each month is about $5,600 with like utilities, pool. So this property, like I said, it's in Fort Lauderdale, 3-bedroom, 2-bath.
How far away from the water?
Like 5-minute drive to the ocean. Yeah. Pool in the back. We converted like the garage to like a games room. So we have like a pool table, pinball
so you're
machine.
Investing in it. The landlord loves this.
Yeah, exactly. We put like a feature wall up, which is like artificial kind of greenery with a neon sign.
You like your feature wall.
Yeah, you've mentioned featured wall a couple times now. This is a big deal for you.
It does look nice in pictures. I've seen the one that
it looks nice in pictures. Yeah, people like you need to stand like to your point about saying like, oh, Airbnbs. There's a lot of people who just put up, or maybe it was your point about like just kind of doing the half-assed bare minimum.
Yeah, you're standing out.
You're standing out. Just putting in that 10% extra, and it makes a big difference. Anyway, so we're all into this property each month for $5,600. Our outlay to like furnish it and get it all set up and do everything was about $34,000. And right now we just had it up. We've had it up for 3 weeks. We've already got $20,000 of bookings in 3 weeks. And that's like slow season. This is kind of the slow season.
In Fort Lauderdale.
Because it's sort of wet hurricane season during the summer months. But I feel like this property is probably all in our annual cost on it is going to be about, say, $70,000. And like conservative estimate will probably make about $110,000. Awesome. Conservative, I'd say.
Good for you guys.
So like I said, in some of these key areas, numbers really make sense. And it ended up working out that when we were looking at it, for us to buy this home, it'd probably be like $850,000 US, give or take. So like our monthly carrying cost by renting it is lower than if we were to have purchased it. And we don't have to put, $200,000 down for a down payment and, like closing costs and all that. So
major repairs are still ultimately the landlord's deal. So you've created a cash flow play on real estate. You don't get the equity build up.
You don't get the equity.
Pure cash flow, but you need to buy burgers with cash flow, so it's important. So that's really cool.
It is like, I like a combination. When people ask me or talk to me about like Airbnb, it's like I like a combination of like, the arbitrage is a pure cash flow strategy, but then like using that cash flow to like purchase properties that you're going to Airbnb as well. So that way you're getting the best of both worlds, like your cash flow, and then you're getting something that's going to have, like capital appreciation, mortgage pay down. So that's the downside with Airbnb arbitrage, like you said, is that you're not really getting those other little things, but
pros and cons for different stages of life, it all kind of works. And I think that's the beautiful thing on real estate. There's so much nuance here. You can create cash flow if you want cash flow. You can get a property and just hold on to it for appreciation. If you think that area is going to, if you're buying something, we keep talking about one property in Oakville that we might build on. Well, the cash flow is really not that important on it because we can, at a stage in our lives where it doesn't really affect us, the cash flow, but the equity has been building really nicely in there and we might build on it. So there's opportunities to do other things with the property. So it kind of changes, throughout life.
That's what I love about real estate, is that you do have like so many, like you said, so many ways to like do things, make money, like things evolve and adapt. Like 5 years ago, no one was really doing Airbnb. People were, but it was like, at that point, it was more like people were using Airbnb to like share a room in their house. Like the first time I used Airbnb was like in New York, in Manhattan. And like me and Nicole went there for a weekend. It was like we were renting a room in someone's house and they were in the other room. And that was more what Airbnb was. But now it's evolved where it's like full houses and...
It's funny how things evolve. And, we've been in this and our family's been in this since the 70s. Like our mom was renting out homes in Toronto. Rooms in Toronto in a boarding house, which we lived in as a family. Nick wasn't actually even born yet. That's how long this one was. And she was renting out rooms for like $12 a week. And she would go in and change the sheets and do all this kind of stuff. She was renting out these different rooms. And then in the 80s, our father was flipping properties. Then there was the 90s with the big real estate collapse. And I think every decade, there's a moment where everyone says real estate's dead. Like I've seen it now, like in so many decades, there's like a moment where someone's like, well, it doesn't work anymore. And the market kind of just adapts. Like real estate's very malleable in that way. In a weird sort of way, even though it's a hard asset, its function and form seems to change. And as the economy morphs, so do the possibilities with real estate. Like this whole thing now with technology and Airbnb, really it was a lot harder to do what you're talking about 20, 30 years ago. Now with Airbnb and technology, you're talking about apps where you can find cleaners. You get the bookings online. Like that wasn't really done. So it is kind of a fascinating thing with real estate. It does offer all these options. Not that there's not headaches with it. There's absolutely headaches, as you know.
So I just went to the Bank of Canada inflation calculator. That $12 a week in 1975 is the equivalent of $66 now.
Yeah.
So this calculator isn't right.
That inflation calculator is not right. Nobody's renting a room. Yes. We just had, you should know this, Matt, just in our team meeting here at Rockstar. Now this is not normal for anyone listening to this. We just had a Western student rental. Someone's getting $1,300 a room. On a Western student, a room.
Wow.
When we first started this business, for $1,300, you could rent a whole house in Hamilton. Or you could rent a whole house. And this is another thing that we always talk about, that as people say, well, prices are changing, no one's going to be able to afford real estate anymore. And it's unfortunately that, no, prices will still likely run because of some of the economic factors that we always talk about. You'll just get less for your dollar. $1,300 used to get you a whole house in Hamilton. Now it gets you a room in a student rental in London, Ontario.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? And that whole house was like...
And that's on the high. Like,
it is. Oh, yeah. Not everybody's getting that.
But even then, I would have thought it'd be like 600.
No, the majority are probably
like, I don't know anymore.
750, 800.
800, 900 is becoming more and more common.
Wow.
Yeah. I was just talking to a neighbor who has a son out in Queens, and they didn't budget for this amount. They're paying $950. So $950 a room because they weren't expecting that. They were expecting, budgeting like $650. Now it's $950, especially out in Queens. Kingston's got
that's really tight.
Really tight. So it's just wild to see these kind of changes.
That's pretty good. I'm like thinking about I should probably look at Student rentals again.
yeah,
I just feel like I
yeah.
deal with too much crap though. I was saying that to someone today. I'm like, oh, student rentals, you can still make good cash flow, obviously. But I'm like, dealing with 5 or 6, like 18,
but there's
19,
usually
20 year
several
old.
months a year that no one's there.
Oh, that's true.
So you have like your house is you're getting rent and no one's living in it. So there's.
I got to be honest. If managed correctly, you might even deal with less problems.
Well,
I don't know. We've had them. We've had them for decades.
And how many bounce checks? Is that even a term anymore? How many lack of rent is being paid on student
Very
rent?
few.
Very few.
Because the majority is coming from the parents.
Okay.
Right? The vast majority is coming from the parents.
So you're very, very rarely dealing with non-payment of rent. It does happen,
Yeah.
but it's very rare.
The only issues we've really had with those are when they leave, like when they're living there too. It can be dirty, like the kitchen. So when you're in there, you're like, oh.
Piles of plates.
Yeah, but so sometimes you're like, oh man, is this?
Can you
like, it's like what's with this house now? But then once they leave and you get a professional cleaning crew through, you're like, oh.
Do you remember that one crew that would come into our houses with knee pads? This crew, they were an amazing group of women that we found that was like a cleaning crew that dealt with the student rental turnovers. So you can book them because there's a day by McMaster where student rentals turn over.
They were hardcore.
They came in, there was 5 or 6 of them, hard knee pads on, like they were scrubbing baseboards, throwing garbage out, like they were amazing.
They would just chuck everything. People would come to be like, hey, I still want that. They're like, tough. They would tell them, they're like, you know what? It's the first, you're out. This is all garbage now. And I'm like, okay, I remember her name, but I was like,
and it was weird.
Just be a little bit nicer, a little bit.
On this turnover day, sometimes you would have like students who had been in there 3 years leaving. So they got a lot of stuff. But on that same day, it's like the people who are getting the house for the next year are asking if they can move in that evening, instead of the first day of their lease. So they're coming in, their parents are all happy. They're typically year 2 students. They're thrilled to see this property. And you're like, hey, can you just give us like 12 more hours? We got to clean all this stuff out of there.
Oh, because if the parents got there early, because this would happen, and it's no different than if like an Airbnb gets left a mess and then someone got there before, their kind of time started, if they could get in somehow. The parents got there early sometimes, the odd time, and they would go through the house and they would just be freaking out. We're like, don't worry, like just chill. Just like Tom said, give us 12 hours. Yeah. We're good. It's all going to be handled. Don't worry about it.
I'll never forget when that one, I remember this kind of just so vividly. We hired property managers because we were finally saying, okay, like we'll have a property manager manage this for us. And the property manager on the turnover day put me on speakerphone with like a group of 4 or 5 parents. And one of the moms just started screaming into the phone at me that like, this has to be cleaned and that has to be cleaned. And we're like, hey, listen, we know we're going to take care of everything. Make a list of everything that you need done. And we always go through that list and update. You
know what I started asking? I don't know if I told you this. I started asking them at one point, I'm like, is this the first child you've had through university living in a student house? And if they said, yeah, I'm like, okay, that's why you're thinking like this. And then I would explain it. Because the other ones that were, if they were there with other ones that if this is their second or third kid, they're just like, oh yeah, I'm used to these properties, no problem, right?
So there you go, Matt. Yeah. So student rentals, keep it in the back of your mind. There's
like hearing those numbers, I'm like, $1,300. That's
and just the amount of students that are pouring into Canada is like off the charts.
Yeah.
Right. So we just have a mismatch between. I cannot believe.
So Kyle just said this is slightly interesting. Partially on topic, but slightly interesting. Kyle just sent a chart over of the tuition increases. I forget how the period of years of graduate programs, undergraduate, and both national students and international students. And the national student numbers have actually gone down in this chart. I think it was 5 years. I don't know, but and then the international ones, it looked like from the chart, I'd have to pull it up again, it went up, have gone up 15 or 20%. So they're just charging more as they bring in more and more of these international students. They're also charging more and more. Yeah, it was interesting. He just sent it over.
It's a second path of immigration into the country, and the universities are just profiting.
They're profiting like crazy from it.
Oh yeah, they're milking it. But I would think that they might be having local domestic students going to school going up or going down? Because I feel like the generation. I was listening to an interview on the way up here, and I was saying the generation coming up, a large percentage of them don't want to, their goal is to become entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how things have changed.
Before you'd never want to be an entrepreneur.
In the 90s when you were going to university, everybody wanted to get their MBA and work on Bay Street. That was all the rage.
Oh, yeah.
It was what MBA program are you getting? So to hear, this is just how history kind of goes through cycles. Yeah. To hear now that students want to become entrepreneurs, it makes sense.
Well, I wanted to work in a big tech company. I thought that'd be the coolest thing, right? So, but this chart, 35. So in 2018-19, the average was 35. It looks like about 35,000. Now it's about 45,000. $25,000. So that's what, 4 or 5 years, and it's from 35 to 45. So that's about what's that third? About a third
Of what? Sorry, you lost me there.
The average tuition.
Oh, God.
Per year.
Oh, wow.
That's like getting into U.S. numbers.
Yeah, it's 45 per year, so it's gone up from 35 in a 4-year time period. So I mean, it's and as the average national student, if you look at the in Canadian undergraduate, it went from, it looks like it's just under 10 to it's about state level as under 10. So they're paying about 4 times.
Can you imagine coming out of
more
school just with 6 figures in debt in this world, then throw on interest and then trying to kind of work that off? Is that why, Matt, you're into some real estate? I mean, you like this economic stuff because we talked about it briefly before we started recording. Mm-hmm. So is this in the back of your mind, just kind of outpacing inflation at this point? This is what...
Oh, now, currently.
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about back then.
No, now.
I think we already established. I was not sophisticated back then. It was all just,
Looks good. Rent is bigger than my expenses. Buy.
Yeah, I think now it's well, first off, now it's a lot of realization that like, cash flow is like really, you always heard the saying cash flow is king, but it's becoming more and more like prevalent, just like how important cash flow is. Because I think like, I would imagine a lot of people, like some of our properties that we closed on a while ago, it's like, well, now the mortgage is coming due again, and you're like, okay, well now I'm going to be renewing it at triple the interest rate that I had before. So some of those numbers are
triple.
Like,
it's triple.
It's literally triple from like 2% fixed at one point 6%. To now like 6. You're just like, okay, well now these numbers that, like made sense back then, you're like, oh, it's starting to become tight. So just the realization that like cash flow really is, I think, like the driver. And that's probably what led to Airbnb, because like if done properly, same with like student rentals, like you can just get more cash flow. And I think like nowadays it's like that's the most important thing, because when you're seeing interest rates go up like that much and you're seeing 20% increases in like utilities and property tax and like other things, it's like if you're not having something that's like really cash flow positive, like it can quickly become a negative soon. And like we have negative properties that we, purchased a while ago that were positive and now they're negative. And you kind of realize like you start to get too many of those, and it's
the equation changes.
You need that experience to have perspective like you're having right now, because so many people would over the years have told Nick and I like, oh, you guys don't know how to make a real money in real estate. Like we're doing these pre-cons, how many of these pre-construction units are you buying? And we're like, hey, you might be able to make money on pre-construction condo units in an area like Toronto where the supply and demand really is out of whack. However, if there's an economic downturn of any sort and you get caught holding a property that you can't cash flow on, you might be in a world of hurt really quickly.
I'm going through that right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what, and I think, but you need that perspective. You almost need to go through it. And that's why for years we've talked about this kind of like 3 bucket strategy, like have cash for deflation and emergencies and kind of to live, have longer term savings in gold and Bitcoin, whatever is your thing. And then have some like cash flow mechanism, whether it's Airbnb arbitrage, student rentals, your own business, but you kind of need all 3 of these components working for you. And for years, people dismissed the cash thing. When we said have cash, we're like, like cash, the liquidity is required to survive.
Yeah.
You can't eat equity. Like you were talking about the cash flow in Florida, your Windsor property might be, or the Barrie one might be gaining equity really nicely, but you can't eat the equity. Mm-hmm. It's the cash flow that's going to kind of keep you alive.
No, it's
right. So
I think like a lot of rookie investors, you kind of like think just about the wealth building side, like, oh,
it's a no-brainer.
You're just like, but even like to your point, like we bought some pre-construction condos in Toronto 5 years ago. We got them for like, one of them's a 3-bedroom townhouse, one of them's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath penthouse kind of unit. And we bought them, and I mean, like since we bought them like 5 years ago, they've probably gone up in value. I don't know, $600,000 or $700,000, which sounds great, right? Like on paper, you're like, oh wow, like that's that's like a good chunk of change. But now we're at the point where it's like, oh, we have to start looking to close on these because they were delayed 3 years, right?
Oh,
so like by the time, like if they would have closed on time, they would have been great.
Oh,
would have like
locked in a low rate.
We would have locked in a low rate. It would have been able to like cash flow even in Toronto at those, because we're getting them at such a good value. But now you're like, oh, well now that same property that probably would have cash flowed, $500-$600 a month. You're like, well now the interest rates are 6%. You're like, it's pretty hard to find rent that's going to cover all of that. So luckily we're in a position where it's like, oh, we have invested in, created businesses and done all those different things to build that cash flow up, where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to close on these. We're gonna have to eat it for a bit, but the end goal is to probably just look to flip them, sell them, collect our capital that we get to keep after we pay the government their unnecessarily large chunk, and then move on and use it for something else. But it's just, I think like we're saying, there's so many pros and cons with real estate, and like it's just important to be adaptable and sort of realize like, you're not going to win all the time. So, but no one talks about the losses. I like to talk about like, you gotta realize that like sometimes you're going to lose, or you're going to go through a tough time. You're going to eat shit, for a bit, but it's like, as long as you have a goal and you work hard over the long period, it does work out. It's all going to work out. You just have to like be able to survive, get through it. So, and I think you made a good point at the last VIP event where you were saying like, like if you need to sell a property, like there's no shame in that right now. It's like, if you need to sell a property because the cash flow doesn't make sense anymore, it's like, but I think like as a lot of real estate investors, you always think like, I got to hold it. Because
it sucks. You don't want,
We almost get whispers like, hey, Tom, Nick, I might need to sell a property. Well, we're like, no, that's legit. You're allowed to sell a property.
Because once I have the mortgage, I'm like, I'm going to have to try to figure out how to get another one if I want to use a mortgage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, but yeah, it makes sense. But I think it's smart to speak about it, because it's not all rainbows and unicorns. And I think sometimes things are positioned that way. And I know in my life, whenever things are positioned that way, it always scares me off, because I'm like, I want the truth. I want the good and the bad. Even if there's a bad side, I still might want to proceed with whatever I decide to do. I mean, I've done a lot of stupid things in my life that the bad side was like far outweighed any benefit from being ridiculous in whatever I decided to do. And I decided to do them anyways. Right. And luckily I still have all my limbs and no major injuries, you know what I mean? But I mean, I still might do whatever it is but I just want to be able to make the decision confidently and with like an accurate representation of what could happen.
I think it's important, especially now with like social media. I mean, there's so many like gurus out there, and it's like everyone just shows like the money and the good side of things, but it's like important to realize like, it's not good all the time. Like there's going to be bad. And if you're not really mentally prepared for it, or you don't accept it, like there's going to be an up and there's going to be a down, it makes it difficult. Yeah. When those downs happen, the people who just thought it was going to be rainbows and sunshine all the time, they're in for a world of hurt. Whereas other people who accept that will be a reality at some point, you can at least like stomach it and be like, okay, create a plan. You got to roll with it.
What does your family think about you with what you've kind of been through in your youth growing up, and now you're at this point where you're talking about multiple properties, you're talking about properties in multiple cities, multiple countries, like are they... It's been quite the journey from, I guess, where you were growing up when there was water being boiled and put into the hot tub, right? Versus
hot tub.
Yeah.
Sorry, hot tub, bathtub. Sorry. Yeah. To versus where you are now. So it's got to be kind of interesting for you to kind of reflect on that when you say you still think of, when you were saying earlier, you still think about that.
Yeah, I mean, my household, we're not like big on talking about money still, so I always try to like enforce it. So I've been able to get one of my brothers to invest in like a property with me, and that's done really well for him. But I know like it's a huge. I definitely, when I was growing up, I wouldn't have thought I would be where I am today. So to actually kind of like be where I am,
awesome, man,
and like try to inspire other people to like do the same things. I think like probably the same for you guys. Once you achieve like a certain like milestone in life, and you've kind of hit a lot of like monetary goals that you had and other things, like now you kind of start to be like, well, how can I give back? So I feel like that's where I'm at now, which is kind of a cool place in life to be like, now it's more about like, well, how can I help other people, inspire other people? Like we're saying about the endless wheel of social media. It's like, yeah, but even though it's a lot of work and there's not always like a payoff in the end, it's like you're still, when you get those messages from someone who's just like, like I watched your video and it really like helped inspire me, or made me think about this. It feels good. It feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good. So I'm kind of at that point now where it's like, just trying to provide value to people and hope that they get inspired, to like sort of change their way of thinking, or, grow their mindset a little bit so they can get out of whatever is holding them back from doing something big.
I'm curious, do you think you guys will spend more time in the US once this E1 visa goes through?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would think we'd like to spend, at least half our time down there. Like I'd like to be down there during the winter months, during the cold, and sort of be up here more for, June, July, August, and then over Christmas time. I feel like, although I also assume is like my parents, retire soon, and Nicole's parents retire soon, they'll probably be more like wanting to come down there for Christmas time. But I do think so. I just see a lot of opportunity in the U.S.
And Florida's your state?
I like Florida a lot just because I just see, just because we're focused on the Airbnb side, it works there, like, especially if we're looking at closing on some stuff in Orlando, and it's just, you do get year round tourism, like millions of people flowing in there. And it's with Airbnb, just like we've said, it's like, as long as you're willing to put in that extra effort, like, don't buy all your furniture from IKEA, don't, cheap out on it, and just really try to create a good experience that it's like, I would want to go there. I think that's the thing. A lot of people who get into Airbnb just want to do it for money. But if you're not willing to, like, if you wouldn't be willing to stay at your own place, then other people aren't going to spend money to stay at your place. So I think because, like, that's what we're looking to do is, I'd like to grow more of like an international Airbnb like company where we have like places in Hawaii and Nashville and Texas and, Dubai and some other places. That's sort of where we're looking to go with it. And because we have a social media following, it does allow us the ability to market our product to people as well. So to be like, hey, if you want to stay and if you're planning a trip to Disney, like, why don't you stay at our place?
That is nice. You can build that attention that you're gathering already in one business. You can definitely leverage for the other business, right? So that is a nice benefit for sure.
Yeah, you're able to market like, oh, this is we're able to get away with, to tap into a pool of, 1 million people who are there to see what we have to say. And, like, you show them your properties, you show them like the value that you're bringing and how you put in that effort. It's like, I know we're going to get a lot of bookings just from people who are like, well, I'm going there anyways, and I would rather stay with like Nicole and Matt.
Sure.
And what's the demographic on the health and nutrition? I'm guessing it kind of skews probably towards your age group or Nicole's age group, and female, I guess, skews that way.
Yeah, it's female, like probably like 95% female.
Oh wow,
but that's good because they're the decision makers. So,
that's what it's
what I was
like.
Thinking, and it's usually like between like 25 and 44 would probably be a larger percentage of it too. So it's also that demographic of people who are traveling and wanting to go places, and have a little bit of extra capital,
and open to using Airbnb as well.
Yeah, because they tend to be more tech savvy. Like people like my parents are less inclined to like use Airbnb. They're still more like booking a hotel and doing it that way. But that demographic, like, people are using Airbnb.
You guys have an interesting perspective too, because you've been doing the social media stuff for a while and use that to build attention and an audience. Do you see the potential of that continuing to last? So what you've built, are there any kind of, anything to plan for, any threats that you see on the horizon that you guys need to prepare for? Or no, you've earned that loyalty, you have an audience, and whatever Nicole and Matt do, likely the audience will be interested in?
Yeah, I think because most of the decisions we make with like the brand is all around like, it's not about the money, but it's about like providing the value and doing what's right for the people. So Nicole is very good at that. Sometimes I get blinded by potentially big sponsorship offers for like, but she's like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not going to talk about, McDonald's or someone like that, where it's like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter if they're going to pay a lot of money, right? It's like, so she's very, very aware of that and has always cultivated it where it's like, she's building like her audience and her community, and like they trust her, and rightfully so, because like whatever she says is like genuine. So she's very, very good at that. So I don't see any sort of issue that I could see arising. Like, who knows how things will change or what will go on, but like the usage of social media is only going up. The desire for content and for people consuming content is only going up. People are spending more times on their phones on like TikTok. So as long as you're kind of adapting to the new platforms and any changes that might take place with like algorithms and stuff, and you're willing to sort of be flexible and adapt your content that way, then I don't really foresee social media or anything like that disappearing, because it's just so ingrained in our lives.
Yeah,
now.
It's not a fringe thing anymore. Like there was, I think in the past we used to say there was mainstream media and then like all this other stuff. Whereas I feel like now you and what you guys are doing with HealthNet Nutrition, you're the mainstream. Like you are the source of information for a huge amount of people. They're not turning on the TV to get a bunch of information. They're going to your videos. So we've kind of flipped. The world's kind of changed all of a sudden.
And as I was going to say too, like, when was the last time that you watched like TV or a movie and you didn't pull out your phone and like do something on social media? I mean, like, I don't know, most of the time myself, I'm guilty, but I see it everywhere. It's like you'll have a movie on the TV or like on Netflix, and then you're on your phone scrolling through social media or something like that, and that's the norm now.
When I need to know how to fix something, what's the first place I go to? Is I go to YouTube.
Yeah,
I'm like, how do I do this? I'm like, oh, okay, here's how I, whatever it is. And I'm like, can't tell you how many things I've learned how to do. Like, it's like my pool heater thermometer I had to change. I'm like, oh, it's just this little part here for, I just have to go grab it and I kind of screw it in here. I was like, it's all this little random stuff that you would never find elsewhere.
And you realize how easy it is to do certain things too sometimes, where it's like you would have paid you know, like to change like a air filter in your car.
Yeah.
You would have sort of realized like, oh, to pay someone $200, and you realize like, oh, you take this clip out, pull it out, and put something in, and you're like, oh, it's so easy. But unless you see it on like a video or something, you would never think. If you had to read a manual, try to figure out how to do it, you probably just pay the person to do it. But if you can go on, you know, YouTube and sort of see how it's done,
Oh yeah.
you're more inclined to be like, oh, why the heck would I pay someone that much money when it's this easy? You know, so you can kind of see behind the curtain on some different industries that you couldn't
It's
before.
shocking to me how the most random things that you need done, like it'll be like a specific dishwasher model and some weird part, and you can put that on YouTube, and someone will have a video like changing that exact part in that exact model.
Wow.
Like, how is this actually? You know,
I had to do that for a pool pump, and I found the exact pool pump. Some guy in the U.S. somewhere doing the exact thing I needed on the exact pool pump.
So I'm like, to your point about content, is just the amount that's the demand for that is not going anywhere, because there's these little niche ones outside of the large kind of, like what you guys are doing with kind of just cook, more just a larger audience versus these random little kind of small little things, right? And they're still getting consumed.
What happens when AI just makes their videos for them? Think about this, Matt. We just have, someone would listen to this video, take them an hour here at Rockstar. Then they would kind of clip it up, and it would take maybe 2 or 3 hours of video editing work to do a few clips. There's an AI tool now that our team just discovered that listens to the whole 60-minute podcast video. And in 10 minutes, it's listened to 60 minutes, and it responds with clips from the podcast.
Wow.
You've now taken 4 hours work and compressed it down to 10 minutes.
Clips.
Where are we headed? Where are we headed?
Clips of when the topic changes.
Oh, yeah.
So it will listen. It'll identify when topic changes based on expression, voice annotation, and the language used, and it'll create the clips. Put the subtitles in. Right. It'll put the subtitles in and have them all kind of set.
I'm pretty sure in a short period of time we'll have like AI versions of ourselves.
Avatars?
You'll be able to like upload all your previous YouTube videos, and they'll watch it all, and then they'll be able to just create the image of you, and you can then go on ChatGPT, get a script written up, upload it to this platform, and like they already have ones where it's for marketing pieces. I don't know if you've seen any of those like AI ones where it's like you can put a script in and you got this kind of like, it looks like a guy, but it doesn't really. You're like, he just like, You can tell that it's like,
not yet.
But I'm like, soon you'll be able to be like, it'll be yourself. Like I was listening to a podcast about AI, and a guy was saying like he'd written an ebook, right? And he was getting it up on Audible. So what they did is they downloaded all of his like talking on all the social media stuff into whatever platform.
And read the book.
And now it's like, instead of him sitting there reading the book for hours, it's like literally just upload it to AI, and then it will like copy his voice. Like,
you know what this means? Your grandchildren are going to be able to ask you questions. Because there's going to be a Matt avatar with all the knowledge that Matt had picked up from all the online discussions that AI listened to. And your grandchildren are going to be able to ask Matt questions.
I think that'd be pretty
That's
cool.
crazy. That's like Star Wars when like Obi-Wan comes back to talk to Luke.
Yeah. And Matt's just this image. Holy shit. Holy shit.
But I mean, like hearing some like podcasts about like health and all that, and like they're saying now that like with the technology and the medicine and everything we have, like they're convinced that like the average age of people is going to go up to like 120.
Okay, I was going to say, I'm hearing 110 is now like not...
People alive today are regularly going to live to like 120, and you're just like...
Holy crap, I'm not on the lap back after all, Nick. I'm not on the lap back.
Yeah.
I got at least 5...
This might only be the first like
I'm on the first half still.
You might be on the first
third. Holy shit.
You need a lot of assets to live until like...
that's a good point.
There's a big shortage of assets for most people if they're going to be...
Real estate and Bitcoin. We didn't even get into the Bitcoin stuff. We'll save that. We'll save that for next time. But Matt, so... Health Nut Nutrition on YouTube. If you just Google up Health Nut Nutrition or go to YouTube, and then Matthew Varga.
Yeah, just my name.
For your name, and because you're going to be putting out real estate stuff. You have real estate stuff on that YouTube channel, and you're going to continue to be doing it, correct?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of my content's more around like Airbnb. So, and then a series that I'm kind of creating now is I'm actually going to like unique Airbnbs. Like tomorrow I'm going to a shipping container Airbnb that's sort of in like Northern Ontario to like do a tour of it and like break down the financials to try to show people like, oh, here's different ways. Like I have one that I'm going to go to, I think next month, it's like a tree house, right? So it's sort of like looking at like, oh, there's all these unique ways that people are doing things. And with Airbnb, like they love unique stays. So that's sort of like where you're starting to see things evolve to. So I wanted to kind of start to like show people like unique stays, and like, we're going to do some videos on it that are just more like the for the massive public, where it's like, oh, it's just beautiful, showcasing how nice this is. But then we're also going to break down the financials where people actually want to know how to do some of that stuff. Or they might be like, oh, I want to do a shipping container home or a boathouse or anything like unique to just show people different ways they can make money and inspire people on that. And, you know, I think the beauty with Airbnb as well is like there's so many different revenue streams that you can derive from it with a little creativity. So like we're adding vehicles to our Airbnbs where like we'll tour the vehicle for people who are coming to stay with us, where it's like, okay, like most people are flying into Florida, like they're flying in there and they need a vehicle to rent. So it's like, well, we'll offer you a vehicle at a cheaper price than what the rental place is. And now we're double dipping on or another revenue stream for our Airbnbs. So you can get pretty creative.
Where's Matt going to head? So he's going to have everything kind of figured out here.
Well, you know, it's international Airbnb domination.
Expansion. You just need the plane flights too to fly people to your Airbnb.
Yeah, that's why you put all the expenses on your credit cards and you use points.
Yeah.
The goal
it's
is
like the Raptor season pass. He's just going to get one of those, you know, where you can buy time on private jets, and he's going to resell that time out. He's going to arbitrage private jets next. Holy shit.
You can arbitrage a lot. That's the thing.
I'm smiling. It's like, yeah, I'm totally doing this.
Yeah, I have people asking like, oh, do you have connections with boats? You know, like, so I'm like, oh, that's the next one. Yeah. Like get a boat and be able to rent it out to people. Like we've got Sea-Doos that we ordered that we're going to, you know, offer to, you know, like people in cottages for Airbnb. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with creativity. So I'm going to try to hopefully showcase that to people and just, you know, see what's out there. And, you know, I like the idea of like life hacking, you know, where you get other people to kind of pay for like the toys that you want and, you know, experiences that you want. So it's sort of like just showing people in real life how it's possible instead of just like theory and talking about it. So
Matt, honored to cross paths with you, man.
Yeah.
Fun to watch. I guess the last few years have been a blast to see you guys get to this point. The next 10 years seems like it's going to be amazing.
Now you have a foundation you're building on. So it should be fun.
It's like once you get past that first like few years of the investing and when it's like really tough and you're
frustrating.
Like you said, over leveraged. Like we were so over leveraged that like now you look back and like, what was I thinking? But you're like, once you get over that,
what was I doing? I'm so lucky I made it. Yeah.
But like, you know, just get through it, you know, like keep focused, keep your goal. And then like once you get kind of like over that hump, it's amazing how things kind of like open up and then you're just like, oh wow, like sky's the limit, you know?
Matt, thank you for doing this, man. Appreciate you stopping by. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Term show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.